Well, hello again. Very nice to see you. Well, I can't see you, of course, but you might be able to see me. Another morning and yesterday of very extraordinary piano playing, I must say. I mean, I sometimes think about myself, that I was going to be a pianist. I mean, what a joke. You have to be playing Chopin ballades by the age of 12. I've been doing some interesting things sort of around the competition when I've had some time and been sleepless at night because, of course, music keeps you awake. Various themes are going around in my brain and I can't go to sleep. So I started reading Paderewski's memoirs, and really, they are it's the most fascinating document. It's not dull, it's highly amusing. And also it gives you a wonderful feeling of period. I think that's what it is. This marvellous feeling of the period before the Great War, when life was rather more civilized than today, and the idea of war on that scale had never entered people's minds, of course. It was a far more limited affair. Paderewski himself was born in a little town called Kurilova in 1860, which is now part of Ukraine. And in his memoirs, he starts from his boyhood, of course, and it's a very lyrical description of his childhood and growing up. And, of course, we are more concerned with his maturity, of course. So what I would like to do today is to talk a little bit about his relationship with the great pedagogue Theodore Leschetizky, and how he came to study with him, and also, very, very interesting, his first experience of Leschetizky and what Leschetizky said to him. But before that, I'll tell you a little anecdote. I mean, this memoirs are full of anecdotes. When he was in Vienna, living and studying and playing, he noticed above his piano a spider came down like this on its little thread and would hover above the instrument. And it would only do this when he was playing thirds. And he noticed that when he played sixths, the spider would go back up into the ceiling. And he found this very extraordinary. He kept on experimenting, and certainly for many months, the spider lived for some time apparently, every time he played thirds, down came the spider. And then when he played anything else other than that, the spider would go back up into the ceiling. And he got terribly upset because he got very affectionate towards this spider. And he got quite upset when he went away on a holiday for some months and returned, and unfortunately he played thirds and there was no spider that came down. I'd just like to talk a little bit about Leschetizky, and if you don't know, I think the problem with many young people is they just don't know what a god Paderewski was at the time, and it's very interesting everything that he did. Theodore Leschetizky was in fact born in Poland. He was born in this fabulous castle at Weinshut, which still exists. You can visit it. It's the most wonderful place to visit, full of perfect, magnificent furniture, paintings, porcelain, marvellous place. And Theodore Leschetizky was actually born there. And as Paderewski said, he was the greatest teacher of his age. And he in fact says that other teachers were mere pygmies compared to Leschetizky. And it's full of little details which are so interesting. Apparently, in Vienna, after a concerts began quite early, and everybody had to have a key to their flat. So, because the concert would end about 10 o'clock, and you weren't able to get into your flat unless you had your own key. And if you didn't have a key, you were fined by the janitor. But as he points out, Leschetizky actually lived in a villa. So he was able, like an artist, to stay up very late at night. Anyway, Paderewski had studied with Leschetizky, and he talks about how he first met him and went to his villa to be interviewed, I suppose. except that Leschetizky thought that Paderewski had arrived to listen to him playing, not to actually play for himself. And the big problem for Paderewski was that he would have been all right if Leschetizky had said to him, "You have no talent." Because, you know, Paderewski was actually advised to play the trombone. I don't know if you know that, but he was told many times he would never make a pianist and that he should take up a wind instrument of some sort. He had the wrong shaped lips for the embouchure on a flute, but the trombone apparently was very suitable for his mouth. But, of course, he didn't want to be a trombonist. So they go in, he goes in, and Leschetizky is very surprised that Paderewski, in fact, wishes to play for him. And in fact, Leschetizky had married a very famous pianist, Madame Esipov, who actually had already performed some of Paderewski's compositions, the variations in A minor, in fact. And she was there, and Leschetizky was quite impressed because Paderewski didn't play Chopin, he played some of his own small compositions. These miniatures that he wrote, which he never really considered seriously, you know. I mean, he actually refers to them as trifles. We find them very evocative of the period, and I certainly do. So Leschetizky said to him that you have great many qualities as a pianist. You have natural technique, but it lacks so very much. But you still have the principal quality, and that is tone. Now, you may remember a couple of sessions ago I talked about tone production, and it's partly because of what I had read about Leschetizky's obsession with his pupils creating a beautiful sound. He said here about tone, and then there is still something else which is quite remarkable, and that is your pedalling. That is perhaps the most extraordinary thing, that anyone who has not seriously studied the piano can realize the enormous importance of pedalling. But as a musician, right. And then Leschetizky went on to emphasize discipline. You must be absolutely disciplined, and I'm afraid that you do not know how to work. And of course, this has become a truism that you can do a lot of practice in completely the wrong way. You have to know how to work. But Paderewski is very heavy on this work idea. He said that the concert pianist's life is about 7% understanding the music, about 5% actually learning to do it, but the rest of it is just hard, slogging work. And as he writes in his memoirs, work, work, work. We think of, you know, this the divine spark came down to Paderewski. It did not at all. He worked very, very hard. And he was naturally gifted, but not with the natural gifts that I've been listening to here. That is absolutely sure. Now, what am I going to tell you about now? Well, I'd like to mention a little bit about the pieces themselves, these miniatures. The melody that we heard yesterday, we heard some of it, was composed around 1885, and I told you the little story about the doctor who was obsessed with Mozart. Paderewski played a few Mozart pieces, but he was sick to death of playing the same pieces for this doctor every time he visited him. So he wrote this melody, and it became very famous, and it ended up in a collection called the Miscellanea Série de Morceaux, Opus 16. And together with that was the Nocturne as well, which I must tell you, the Nocturne affects me every time I hear it, you know. There's some essential sentiment about this wonderful piece of music. It's so simple, perhaps sentimental in a little bit, but I'm a wreck every time I hear it. In 1886, he published another collection of these little ones called the Humoresques de Concert, and we've heard this a lot in this particular competition, the minuet, but also the Cracovien Fantastique, as it's called. All right, well, a couple of things just from the memoirs. Paderewski, who had a great sense of humour, he said that the whole nation of Poland moves in tempo rubato. And there's a long section in the memoirs concerning tempo rubato and how you should approach it. And it's not just that simplism that they always quote about Chopin, you know, with the left hand remaining entirely constant in rhythm and the right hand doing whatever it wants to do. He's much more analytical about it, and it's far more interesting. So what I'd like to do then is play a little of yesterday's and this morning's, what impressed me anyway, some of the excerpts. And of course, with my little side stories, I should try and tell you about a couple of things. The first one I'd like to listen to is Gu Tai Ha from Korea. He was playing a fazioli. It's a fantastic instrument, by the way. I'm sitting upstairs. It's the longest grand piano I have ever seen in my life. I believe it is the longest. It's the most spectacularly beautiful thing. Anyway, he played, the thing that interested me was Kreisleriana. And I don't think you can play Kreisleriana unless you really understand the story of Hoffmann behind it. It's this crazy story of a cat and Kreisler. I think he was a type of civil officer, a very important person. I can't quite remember his position, but it doesn't matter. And in the printing office, these two memoirs, because the cat wrote memoirs, you see, these two memoirs get mixed up together, and they're published as a sort of mixed up mess. And this explains a great deal about why Kreisleriana sounds the way it does. And I think unless you read the Hoffmann of course was a very unusual writer. If you read the Hoffmann story, Schumann was very, very influenced by Hoffmann. It gives you an insight into Kreisleriana. And I think I can hear a cat actually. Let's just listen and see what you think. Well, I don't know if you've ever owned a cat, but if you have, it's very evocative music, I think. The name of the cat in the story is Katamur, if I remember correctly. Okay, well, let's get off this rather amusing subject and move on to the next pianist, who was Rustam Muradov from Russia, and he played a Steinway instrument. But I was rather taken with his performance of the Nocturne. We've heard a lot of nocturnes. I just happened to like this one for some reason, and I wrote down on my little notes excerpt. So let's just listen to it, bearing in mind that this was a very popular work of Paderewski's, probably next to the Minuet, the most popular. just find it so affecting that, perhaps it's just my nature, I don't know, but it's the most wonderful, eloquent, emotional piece of music. We move on to another Russian, Ilya Popoyan, who's playing a Steinway, and he played quite a version, a very virtuosic version of La Valse by Ravel. Now, of course, Ravel denied that. What we can hear, I think, is the presage of the First World War, of the Great War, that there's a sort of doom-laden sense of destruction of the previous period, which of course was the waltz period. And sometimes I often wonder, whether a composer does understand that other people listening to his music can have completely different ideas about what his music indicates, that what it means. And I see no reason why it could mean that when Ravel didn't think it meant that at all. He was just exploring tonalities according to him. So I'd like to just play the last part of this, because it was really quite spectacular, and you can feel this, because the idea of the La Valse was actually to begin with. The clouds were obscuring a ballroom, and gradually through the piece the clouds and mist begin to fade away and reveal a state ballroom in 1885 in Vienna. But let's listen. At the end is where the ball is finally revealed. It's fantastic, and the playing was also brilliant. It's a marvelous piece of music. There were 3 versions of it: one for orchestra, one for 2 pianos, and one for a solo piano, I think. Right now, the next person I'd like to play is the one the young lady from Taiwan, who played Mozart so wonderfully, absolutely wonderfully. And she chose some big works for her second stage: the Liszt B minor sonata, and also the Scriabin sonata. The Scriabin was very, very successful, I thought. It was a fantasy. Sorry, excuse me, the fantasy number 2 sonata. Well, it was a sonata fantasy, right? It was a sonata fantasy in G sharp minor, But I'd like to listen to a little part of the very spectacular, I can't really describe this. It was such an extraordinary experience, of the Liszt B minor sonata, just the section associated with the fugue. Thank you.
This young lady took the Liszt B-minor sonata by the throat and shook it, I can tell you. She gave 120% to it. Overwhelming experience for someone who's ever attempted to play this work. And then this was followed this morning by Yasuko Furumi, who, if you remember, gave us this fantastic Shostakovich sonata. Do you remember? With these huge leaps, so athletic. But I'd like to play something extremely quiet tonight, and it was this afternoon, and it is the conclusion of the Ravel Valse in Noble Sentimental. It was so beautiful the way she concluded this work. Can we have that? So beautiful. So she could play this magnificent Shostakovich, but also the Ravel in that extremely sensitive way. Ilya Ovcharenko from Ukraine played a piece that I don't know terribly well, but the jury seemed to know it extremely well. It's this beautiful arrangement by Liszt of Schubert called the Litany. We'll just hear some of that now.
heartbreaking, really. Ilya Ovcharenko from Ukraine gave the most great performance, I think, of the Rachmaninoff second piano sonata also. And he played a very interesting work by an Argentinian composer named Ginastera, the Sonata No. 1 in C major. So I advise you to listen to his YouTube recording altogether. So I'd like to end with Kotaro Shigemori, who played some Bach. And I put this question to you. Why was it that none of the participants, except this chap, actually selected Bach in their free choice? When I mentioned someone, I can't remember their name, who chose, I think it was a Japanese pianist who chose the Petri arrangement of Sheep Safely Graze. Someone said to me, well, that's not really Bach, it's Petri. But the point is, wonder why that was. I mean, I find that quite curious, that Bach was so rarely chosen. Scarlatti was chosen, certainly. But why not Bach? Anyway, we'll close this afternoon with the Shigemori playing the Bach Prelude and Fugue number 8. But we'll only listen to the prelude. It's in E-flat minor. This is the BWV 853. Okay. So wonderful to hear Bach, isn't it? The foundation stone of Western harmonic music. Wonderful. What I would like to do tomorrow, I'll talk a little bit about Paderewski's political connections when he represented Poland at the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. There's some very interesting anecdotes, and also from the memoirs, something like that. Apart from the fact that after this afternoon we finish stage 2 and we move on to the next stage in the competition. So I look forward to seeing you then and having another little chat. Bye.